JLF's Brave New World welcomes you back to the second session of the day. We're delighted to share with you that we've exceeded 2 million views for JLF's Brave New World, and none of this would have been possible without you, our viewers, our wonderful writers and festival partners, and of course, keep those questions coming. As we lead into our 100th episode, we would love to hear about how JLF Brave New World has impacted or informed you. So do record a short video and send it to us. Those of you who missed our earlier session today, The Algorithms of Love, Ravinder Singh in conversation with Nishtha Gautam, and all our other sessions featuring His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Margaret Atwood, Ran Pamuk, Sonal Mansingh, Vikram Chandra, Sanjeev Sanyal, and so many others. You can catch them on our Facebook page, JLF Litfest, or on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. Our official radio partner is Red FM, Bajate Raho. Our next session is Live a Little, Howard Jacobson in conversation with Chandrahas Choudhury. An award winner, writer, broadcaster, Howard Jacobson in conversation with Chandrahas Choudhury talks about his life in writing and his latest novel, Live a Little, a wickedly observed novel about falling in love at the end of your life, told with Jacobson's trademark wit and style. It is in equal parts funny, irreverent, and tender, a novel to make us all consider the path not taken and whether you could still change course. Howard Jacobson has written 16 novels and 6 works of nonfiction. He won the Bollinger Everyman Woodhouse Prize for comic writing in 2000 for The Mighty Walzer, and again in 2013 for Zoo Time. In 2010, he won the Man Booker Prize for The Finkler Question, and was also shortlisted for the prize in 2014 for J. His latest novel, Live a Little, has been described by The Guardian as wonderful and by the Sunday Times as joyous. Chandrahas Choudhury is the author of Days of My China Dragon, Clouds, and Arzi the Dwarf. Last year, his novel Arzi the Dwarf was published in Oriya as Bamana Arzi. Please do remember to comment and ask questions by typing it into the comment section. And in case any of you drop off due to bandwidth issues, you can find us on our YouTube channel, Jaipur Litfest JLF. And of course, if we drop off, just hang in there. We'll be right back. Ladies and gentlemen, Live a Little, Howard Jacobson in conversation with Chandrahas Choudhury.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. Howard, it's great to see you again after January.
It is. It's wonderful to see you again, and what a different world we are in. It seems like 5 minutes ago we were talking, and now It's as though we're on another planet.
I almost meant to say to you that in the time since we last met, the sort of title, the meaning of the title of your last book has changed a bit. At the time, it meant, when you said live a little, it meant, okay, let go, enjoy yourself a bit more. Now it sort of means take whatever you can grab or scrape.
Yes, be grateful. Live a little, because a little might be all you have. I hope it's not as bad as that.
Well, in that case, shall we get ourselves a drink? I mean, there's no reason to leave it for another day. What have you got yourself?
Yes, to you, I have a beer. I would normally be drinking red wine at this time, but I don't want to get overexcited. I want to keep a clear head. And anyway, it's very hot in London. Don't know what it's like there. It's a very hot day in London, so I'm drinking a beer. So cheers to you.
Cheers. What I meant myself is in the spirit of sharing more than just literature. It's a cocktail that's perfect for coronavirus environment because it's made of freshly squeezed lemon juice, honey, and gin on ice. It's called the Bee's Knees. It's perfect for having with Kaluki nights.
It's not a cure, is it?
No, it's not a cure. It's a pickup. It's not a.
I'll buy 1,000 liters if that's.
Okay, so since we are catching up a little bit, what has the last 3 or 4 months been like for you? I take it that you, along with the rest of humanity, have used this time to catch up with the Netflix backlist?
I've done a little of that, yes. I've done a little.
You have?
To be honest with you, my life has not changed. This is what I do. I'm locked away in the house. I'm writing all the time. I don't see anybody, and I wash my hands a lot. What's different? It's the only thing that's different is fear. Previously, I lived this life and I was very happy doing it. And now, although I'm a party goer and I miss the parties, but apart from that, I'd be happy with it. But it's just that fear of something very horrible out there. And so, but that makes me work harder, because as long as I'm writing, I don't think of that fear. I find the writing is an inoculation against that fear.
Okay, I was just switching off the fan so I can hear you better. Well, have you been getting any writing done? Has writing felt any different to you? I know.
Yes, well, I've been writing something different. I've been writing a memoir. Can you hear me? You look as though you can't hear me.
Yes, I can hear you.
I've been writing a memoir, and in fact, I've almost finished the memoir. So I've written a colossal amount in a short time. And it's been quite good for me thinking about my boyhood at this period of my life, and when there's so much to fear out there. So I recommend it. Any writer who hasn't got a novel, write a memoir. And anybody who's not writing anything, just write a memoir. A memoir is because everybody has a memoir in them. Even if they're only 6 years old, you've got a memoir in you. Write a memoir. It gets rid of all your fears and anxieties, and it's something nice to be doing. And who knows, someone might read it one day.
But if it's so good for you, then why is it taking you so long to write one?
You mean why didn't I start it sooner?
Yes.
I've written it very cool. Why didn't I start it sooner? Well, I thought it was unbecoming. Changed my mind now, but I thought there's a book by someone, isn't there, called a postmodern writer whose name I've forgotten, called "Aren't You a Bit Young to Be Writing Your Memoirs?" Can you remember the author of that? But I always took that. Maybe you shouldn't write that. Somebody with whose name is all initials, R.B. something or other. Johnson, don't know. But I thought maybe you could be too young to write your memoirs. But now I wish I'd started sooner. But in a way,
do you find
the interesting thing about writing your memoirs is I discover I don't know whether I'm remembering my life, my actual life, or I'm remembering all the novels I wrote about my life. So in a way, I'm going into the fiction, I'm factualizing the fiction.
Yes.
Because I'm factualizing the fiction, it's actually further away from real life than the fiction was. So the memoir is probably the most untruthful book I've ever written. But don't mention that to anybody.
No, you said it yourself now. As long as 200,000 people haven't heard that, you're perfectly safe.
How many?
Well, do you find that you... I find, for instance, that because I can't travel, I find for some reason my sense of reality is a bit shrunken, and for that reason it's harder for me to generate that sense of pleasure in writing something up. Do you find that is not a problem for you?
That's not a problem for me. I don't need the traveling to write. It's all here. I'm a mental traveler anyway. I excavate myself. I've always excavated myself. I think I'm what's called a solipsist. I am my own subject. So there isn't really much difference between this and writing fiction, except, as I say, this is less true.
What about language? Do you find in writing that you need to hear linguistic sparks from anybody other than yourself, or can it all be generated in-house?
It's all in-house. Most of it's generated in-house. You've got to be careful, because if you're not talking to other people, you do start to become a little stale to yourself. Yes. So I find reading is quite good for that. Not necessarily whole book, but sometimes I think I'm bored with my vocabulary. So I'll read Henry James for an hour or George Eliot for an hour, and you get that different rhythm and cadence and a different collection of words. Yes, you need that. If I didn't have that, it would be bad.
Well, it's good that you bring up these names, because I found myself thinking, as I'm sure you have, although perhaps our starting and end points are somewhat different, about what the place of fiction is in the life of our time today, and whether it can hold its own as other storytelling forms appear, and what is it that you think fiction does that other forms can't do?
Well, it depends what kind of other forms you're talking about. If you're talking about movies or dramas, well, we're all the same family. Really, we storytellers are all doing something similar. But one way or another, the novel or the film or the drama has never been more necessary. Fiction, with its lies and its ironies and its complexities and its uncertainties, has never been more necessary because we are living in such ideological times.
Yes.
People's views are so set. People think that to have anybody disagree with you is a profound insult and proves the wrongness of their position. Let's say literature, and by literature, let's include not just the novel, but also films.
Yeah.
But I am a novel man. I think the novel does everything better than anything else. But let's include.
I agree.
Terribly, terribly important because it takes you out of your point of view. And you should read books with which you disagree, books written by writers whose views you abominate. The thing that's going on, which is there's a writer that says something about gender or race or nationality or something, whose views I disagree with, that book I must, worse than that book I must ban or censor. That is absolutely against the spirit of literature. The books written by people who are least like you and least sympathetic to you are the books you should read first. Don't read what you agree with.
One would have thought that people who read novels would come around to fairly quickly to sort of agreeing with what you have just said, but from looking around, it doesn't appear to be so.
No, because art. This is a bad time for art. Because art is the human mind in an argument with itself. That's the point of art. You enter art to be in an argument with yourself. And people don't want to be in an argument with themselves. They want to be in an argument with everybody else, but they want to be in total agreement with themselves. And I think once you are like that, you lose the art of reading. You lose the art of listening and watching. You lose all those arts that we think, the thing we call literature and painting and music, all those things exist to do. This is a bad time for it. And we have to hope that we will get ourselves out of it soon, very soon.
I wonder if one were to agree with you, then I wonder what that implies, not just for how we think of art, but also of how we think of the comic or how we think of laughter. Because it seems to me that the one thing that the novel does extremely well is capture all the shades there are of laughter. Laughter can be subversive, it can be rueful, it can be anarchic, it can even be sad. And as a sustained note across chapters and pages and hundreds of pages, when you put a great comic novel down, you never forget the extremely unique way in which it has shepherded its resources. And I wonder if cinema can keep up that sense of play and that sense of the infinite shades that exist in laughter, which it seems to me is a man's defense against trauma and trouble.
Well, it absolutely is. And you think of reading something like a novel by Rabelais, something like that. The novel begins in laughter. Really, the first great novels are novels of satire and derision and laughter in which everything is open to our scorn. And when you live in a time in which some things are sacred, that's when people have trouble with novels, because for a novel, nothing is sacred. Laughter exists to remind us that nothing is sacred. Laughter and the sacred don't go well together, which is why you don't hear that much laughter in a church or in a mosque or in a synagogue. You don't hear a lot of laughter. Sometimes you hear some. It's a shame you don't hear more. But laughter is the great solvent, isn't it? It's the great solvent of sanctimony. It's the great solvent of devotion. All those things about which we think we are certain. You don't have to be. Laughter needn't be godless. Laughter can be very godful, but full. I mean, the great comic, where there are gods in the great comic books, there are lots of gods. One god doesn't sit well with a comic novel. And that's what comedy is for, really, for multiplicity, for disagreement, for the unsettling of things. It can, as you say, be profoundly upsetting. It can be sad. Laughter can be sad. I love it. Yes. I love, as a writer, I love those moments when the laughter I hope I'm generating. And I know I'm generating if I make me laugh. I can only know that in the quiet of my room. I can only know if I'm making me laugh. And if I'm making me laugh, that's good. And then at that moment, when you feel the laughter just turn on a kind of pinhead, that's not only funny, that's suddenly, if that's true, if that's the way I've said it is, if that's what those characters think about that moment, that is very upsetting. And that moment when the laughter turns to not necessarily tragedy, but then the moment when laughter turns to tragedy is the greatest moments of, those are the highest moments of art.
Absolutely
That's when
right.
art is at its most wonderful. But mainly you'll settle for a tear or two. Out of the laughter, a tear or two. And then you know that's going well. And then out of the tears into laughter again. And then you know the whole drama of art is at work.
Yes.
Everything questioning everything else. Everything in contradistinction to everything else. Everything in an argument. It's wonderful. Wonderful to create if you're the author, and it's of course wonderful to read if you're the reader.
Yes.
And it's something that, although I say films do it and plays do it, it's the case, but nothing does it quite like a novel, because in the novel there's just your ear, and the voice of the writer and the voice of the writer's characters, and it's so intimate, and nobody can come near you really. There's just you and the book alone in the world. It's a wonderful experience.
And I think what's so beautiful about laughter in novels is that sometimes it's not the words, but the tone that makes you laugh. And that tone can't be generated. You can't isolate it in a certain phrase or a certain attitude towards life. It's all somewhere in between the spaces of the words, isn't it?
Yes, it's the atmosphere of language and the atmosphere of a writer's mind. I mean, that's probably the first thing you notice when you think, I like this book. Why do I like this book? It's the atmospherics, not the actual words that are being used, and certainly not the story, which is often the least important. It's the complexion of the writer's mind and imagination. Yeah, the music of his thoughts.
Yes. Could I ask you to reflect a little bit then on what you think the relationship is between the sort of laughter we've been talking about now and the atmosphere of a very popular kind of laughter of our day, stand-up comedy?
Stand-up comedy is an inferior version of what we're talking about. There are some very, very brilliant stand-up comedians.
Yes.
There are some moments in stand-up comedy that I think, are classical and they are like art. Billy Connolly, when Billy Connolly was at his best, there are moments of Billy Connolly or Barry Humphries as Edna Everage, which were Barry Humphries was like a demon, was like a dynamic force. You felt you were going back to Aristophanes or something. And Barry Humphries, I don't know whether you watch him over there, the Australian comedian, and Billy Connolly too would just be an elegant wit, storytelling, and you see in writing the hilarity has to be controlled, otherwise the pages won't move forward. On the stage, you can see the hilarity unloosed, and that can be a very satisfying thing, just not as satisfying as the book.
I've always found it amazing that when I find myself in a social gathering and find myself laughing at people, so much of it is the way they stop between words, or the way their faces change expression, or even the way the accent sounds, and all of those things are denied to literature, and yet so many writers find the resources to generate amazing riches to replace those.
Well, it's in those qualities that you've just described. It's in tone. I mean, tone is the verbal equivalent to a facial expression, isn't it? And a master of tone, some of the great Dickens or Joseph Conrad, particular masters of tone, I think, can do anything in the turn of a sentence, in the break, even in punctuation. There can be such a thing as comic punctuation. They can do as much or if not more with the atmospherics and of prosody as any person can do with their face. More.
I know for many years you wrote an extremely interesting column in The Independent, which was part of the pleasure of that was written with the same dash and brio that was in your books. And I wonder if at any point in those years you thought about how, when laughter is such a important and fundamental human emotion, in all the religious books that are written up, not necessarily in folk religion, but in all the very formal religions, how is it that they all are so absolutely serious in what is said, and they leave themselves like an entire flank utterly exposed to ridicule and mockery?
How did I feel? Well, I just enjoyed being the person who could mock them. And that was what I did. I thought I was very lucky every week to be able to mock something like that. Not every week did I feel in a mocking mood, or not every week was mockery the appropriate tone. But often it is. I mean, the person who mocks well, a satirist, is never short of work in our time.
Well, in a way, though, would I be right in suggesting that for the fiction writer, I think we'd be kidding ourselves if we, of course, I mean, you are now a highly venerated author, but for most writers, for at least 10 or 20 years of their writing lives, especially if you're writing novels, I think it's fair to say that if you didn't write a book, not a whole lot of people would take a lot of note. And in those years, I think what sustains you is your own sense of pleasure and ambition in a form that seems very essential. And in a way, so the novel is our religion, isn't it?
Yes, but you've got to be so careful, because I found the reason we are novelists is we are more sensitive than most people. I don't mean we have finer sensibilities, I mean we have thinner skin. And I think we set about writing novels because, in the first place, because as young people, we'd be more easily hurt. And we want to try and correct the world and try and reestablish our place in the world by writing. Yes. And we do that because we've been hurt. So I think we start from the fact that we have thin skin. And because we have thin skin, we can very easily be knocked off course by things that people say. I remember at one point, about 3 or 4 books in, I was doing well. People were reading what I was doing. I thought, there are, it's happening. I've become a writer. And I received one review. And I didn't agree with a single word this person said. I saw there was no reason to value this person's comments. But he had one phrase. And this phrase must have worked because it must have touched off a worry I had about myself. And the phrase was relentlessly entertaining. Howard Jacobson is relentlessly entertaining. Now, there's a way in which you could think how wonderful to be, never to give up on entertaining. But clearly what he meant was give it a rest. Just give it a rest at some point. And I took that to heart and I thought, what if I am relentlessly entertaining? What if I really am relentlessly entertaining? And I then decided I was going to write a different kind of book. And I started a book that was relentlessly unentertaining. So relentlessly unentertaining that to this day, it's my only book that's remained out of print, and nobody wants to read it. It's quite good, actually, from a relentlessly unentertaining point of view. But it was a book about the novel. It was a book about the Bible. I thought I'll take a theme here that nobody can think is unimportant. It was still a comedy of sorts. It was the story of Cain and Abel. And I felt I could write the story, a fiction of the Cain and Abel, because I was an older brother and I knew what it was to resent a younger brother coming along and taking all my attention. You might remember it in the Bible story, God prefers Cain's sacrifices to Abel's. I felt my mother and my father preferred my brother's sacrifices, as it were, to mine. So I didn't kill him, but there were times when
I think we may well have lost Howard briefly, Chandrahas, on this happy moment. He didn't want to entertain, as he said. He wanted.
Well, he's left us a lot to think about. Maybe he's just getting himself another beer.
That may well be a good thought. But Chandrahas, your own work has been so fascinating, and the last work that we shouldn't even name it anymore because it has to do with Chinese food or etc. How do you?
No, there's nothing more Indian than Chinese food now, Sanjay.
Exactly. How do you come up with your themes?
It's. I think if you just wander around the world, you're never short of material, and you just organize, plot, and plan, and hope it doesn't go stale. In this case.
And in Bhubaneswar, is there a book cooking, and will we read about the crabs and the prawns from Chilka, which has always been my favorite. Those crabs taste just so incredibly different from anything that you eat anywhere else in the world.
They are wonderful taste-wise, but narratively, I think the crabs of Bombay are the best, because when you go to buy them, you encounter an amazing world at 5 o'clock in the morning, including people who arrive at 2:30. Oh, there he is back again.
We got Howard back. Howard, you returned. We thought we lost you because of your relentlessness.
My relentless unentertaining. So you turned me off, didn't you? Be honest, you turned me off. You said we've had enough of this.
No, we're back again. So do you want to finish off what you were saying?
I finished it. You just didn't hear.
Oh, I see. Well, I can ask you some more questions. One of the things I wanted to ask you is, when you go back to your earlier books, are there some you feel were so specific to a time and place that that was the only time you could have written them? They are not you anymore. Or is there a kind of Jacobson-esque continuum to them all?
It's funny. I find them all very difficult for me to read now, because I want to correct them. Two things will happen, and I am a loser either way. I read them and I think, that is so wonderful. I'll never be able to write like that again. And that makes me very upset. Or I think, how did I let that book out of the house when it's so poor? It's very rare that you read and you think, I can write. It's no better than I am now. I'm just as good as I was then, but that's very good and there's no problem. It's a fraught. It's like, to go back through your old books is like navigating a minefield. There are dangers waiting for you everywhere. It's best to avoid them. I find I can't read myself. I love it when people tell me things that they remember from my books. I swell with pride and love for the books, and I'm always surprised at what was in the books, because I don't remember. I don't remember them. You live with them. I mean, for me, a novel is the work of between 2 and 3 years. I live with that book for 2 or 3 years. There is nothing else on my mind, nothing else, and a lot of the time, no one else. There's just me and those sentences, and I work the sentences and work the sentences and work them. Everything gets written and rewritten 100 times. I don't move quickly. I work very, very slowly over those things. And you would think while you're doing them, I will never, ever, ever forget the experience of doing this. But you do. You just do. You move on and do that. You are an unfaithful lover and spouse if you are a novelist. You have to reject your previous novel and fall in love with the next one. And then when somebody reminds you of an old novel, it's like being reminded of a lover. It's touching. Oh yes, that person was really very nice. I had a very, very nice time with that person. What a shame it's no more, but it has to be no more. But if anybody were to say to me, what advice do you give to any writer who's thinking about looking back over his old work? Don't do it.
Has it ever been hard for you to write, not because of necessarily of the mechanics of writing, but because of some sort of crisis of faith?
It was hard.
Not in religion, in writing itself.
No, I know. It was hard for me to start. It was hard for me to get going because I wanted to be somebody else. And I wanted to write novels about subjects I knew nothing about. I wanted to write English country house novels. I wanted to be an upper English aristocratic gentleman. I wanted to write like Anthony Cole or Henry James. I wanted to have that kind of elegance and aloof. I wanted to have an aloof elegance and calm, which I do not possess. And so when I tried to write sentences in that form, they were pathetic. They just were terrible, really. So I got nowhere. And it was only when I felt my life had got to an absurd pitch. I was teaching in a polytechnic in a town I didn't like, in the English Midlands. I felt depressed. I felt ridiculous. I thought my life, the only way I can deal with myself now is to turn myself into an object of satire. And I wrote a satiric novel, which I hadn't wanted to do. It was a kind of campus novel, which I'd never wanted to write. I wrote everything that I didn't think I want to write because it was the only way I could get started. After that, there are the usual things. You're not sure whether the idea you've got is right. But after that, there's been no real break in my writing, apart from the time when I thought maybe it's true that I was relentlessly entertaining and maybe I should shut up.
Can comedy in the novel sometimes turn unpleasant? And could one of the reasons for that be that it's very easy in a sense, the power dynamic in a novel means that as a narrator, you stand above the characters and can make all sorts of judgments about them. Can that sort of thinking, I don't necessarily mean in your own work, but is there the potential for that to become too facile? What should be done to complicate that relationship? Can a character surprise a narrator or writer?
Well, you've asked several things here. I like the idea at the beginning one about things being unpleasant.
Yes.
And sometimes we feel novels shouldn't be unpleasant. We feel novels should be nice. There's a line of Philip Roth's from that novel Sabbath's Theatre, which goes something like, "For a pure sense of being tumultuously alive, nothing beats the unpleasant side of existence." Mm-hmm. And the truth is that there's a certain kind of unpleasantness in art altogether. We see it in paintings, things that shock us. We see it in films, sometimes films we can't bear to watch. And it's often there in literature, which energize us, whose ugliness and bad feeling energize us, which is why I believe you cannot castigate works of art for not sharing your assumptions. So there is a writer, for example, the French writer Céline, who was a very, very nasty fascistic piece of work, writing in France at the time of the Nazis. He was a Nazi, and he was an out-and-out anti-Semitic, an anti-Semite. I, for obvious reasons, don't much care for anti-Semites, but I love his work. And some of the work I love is actually clearly anti-Semitic. But there's something about the energy of his hatred that does something. Doesn't leave me feeling happy. It leaves me feeling very uncomfortable. And I don't know in the end, if I had to summarize all I felt, I wouldn't be able to. But I have to say, there's something about the tumult of the ugliness that energized. You think of, we mentioned Baudelaire earlier. Not Baudelaire, but Rabelais. Rabelais' Gargantua and Pantagruel is full of murders, spite, acts of cruelty, acts of horribleness to people, really, really ugly things. But the comedy of it, we need it somewhere. We might not need it in life, and if we do need it in life, we then exercise it in life. And it might be that one of the functions art performs is to give you a release from that ugliness. One of the things we do when we laugh, we often laugh at ugly things, which is why I think attempts to censor laughter misunderstand the nature of laughter and what laughter is for. Sometimes we laugh against ourselves, sometimes we laugh at other people. Laughter is cruel. And if we insist that laughter should be kind and correct and observant of the protocols and decencies of our time, we ruin laughter and we ruin comedy. Comedy is there to upset us greatly.
Well, that brings up and leads to interesting questions. Do you think there can be a purely aesthetic reading of a novel, completely divorced of its social and political content? A novel is a work in language and an experiment in creating meaning. Can you read a novel just for the beauty of its expression, and can you hold that opinion against all those who say, well, this is not how we want novels to be?
Yes, but it can be difficult, and yes, we should be able to, but it's hard. We live in a context. The book itself was written at a time and in a context, and that's the other reason why we must be careful how we judge, because we cannot bring what we think is humane and right and true and honest to bear upon a work that was written, created in a time that felt completely different things. It's hard to do, but I think one should aspire to do it. That doesn't mean that the novel is not about anything. That doesn't mean that the novel is just an assemblage of sounds and music and has no social meaning. But I certainly think the more we can empty our reading of political expectations and political requirements, the better job we do of enjoying art. I'm not an art for art's sake man, but I don't think art is art for society's sake either. It's somewhere between the two of those. And we're in a constant argument between the two.
Wonderful. Howard, it's time for some questions from people around the world. So I'm just going to read them out to you. And if you require me to repeat them, I shall do so. Here's the first one from Tilotama Show. She says, "You have written that there is not enough room left for people to be peculiar. Yet it's only by being peculiar that we achieve a measure of happiness. Perversion is exhilarating. What is the greatest peculiarity that you have indulged in these solitary times?"
Oh, that's a tough. I think that's private.
I should have thought so, yes.
I think I'm not prepared to say what my greatest peculiarity is. In fact, although I talk about peculiarity and I talk about eccentricity and wildness, my secret not to leave this room is that I'm rather tame. And although I would like to be peculiar, I'm actually rather conventional. So I can't think of anything truly unconventional that I've done. And in fact,
what about the peculiarities of the two protagonists of Live a Little? I mean, they have lots of very peculiar traits. Well,
they do. Yeah, but sorry, I thought this question related to what I've been doing.
Yes, that's true. But perhaps as a placeholder, you can submit one of those.
My characters in Live a Little are very peculiar. I mean, Beryl, the heroine of it, who I love and I think is wonderful, is rude and crude and unforgiving. She can't bring up her children. She hates the men she's married. She hates almost everybody really, except the man who she meets, the hero of the novel. And he is very peculiar in that he's not as peculiar as he thinks he is. He thinks he did something very strange when he was a boy. I won't talk about it here. And as a consequence of that, his life is ruined because he keeps thinking he's just ashamed of himself. And as somebody that's ashamed of himself, he feels he's not been able to lead a normal life. But I can imagine these things. But myself, if this was a question about myself, I'm a disappointingly conventional man. I'm sorry.
Well, he's not peculiar as he thinks he is. I think is a very devastatingly acute observation, and that's what is at the center of the energy of all those sections about Shimmy in Live a Little.
Well, I can give you
next question.
I'll give readers a clue to it. What Shimmy does is when Shimmy's a boy, Shimmy steps into his mother's underwear. He's so ashamed that he did that. He feels that makes him less than a man, and he'll never be able to live a proper man's life afterwards. When my publisher read this, said, "What's he making such a fuss about? What's he done? All he's done is stepped into his mother's underwear. I spent my life in my mother's underwear, man." And I said, "Well, that's why you're a publisher and not a novelist."
Okay, next question. This is quite an acute one. Nilanjana asks, "What thought do you put into your book titles? They instantly stand out. What is the process involved in that? Do you decide on the title before writing the book?" It's a minor art of the novel, isn't it? Titling it.
Very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. And I'm struggling this moment, even as this question comes to me, with what title to give my memoir. Some novels just write them. Some titles just write themselves.
Yes.
And I wrote a novel, my second novel, which was about somebody who is very interested in Thomas Hardy and thinks he's Thomas Hardy and is very interested in the way in which Thomas Hardy as a novelist always seems to be looking through windows at his characters. So Peeping Tom, you just knew it had to be Peeping Tom. But other ones, Coming From Behind was a title that the novel almost came out without a title before I had it. And then I heard somebody saying it about a sports match, so and so and so on. So who's a past master at coming from behind. And I thought, Coming From Behind is the story of a failure. It's different every time, but it's very important. A title is a very important thing. And I worry that some of my titles I'm worrying now. I'm deeply worried now about what to call my memoir. If anybody's got any suggestions about what I should call my memoir, of course they don't know what's in it, but they can guess what's in it. But if anybody guessing what's in my memoir has got a title for me, I'm very grateful. I'll pay them £1.
Extremely generous of you. Next question. Arun G asks, "To what extent does a memoir need to be brutally honest, as at times it may hurt others who may be part of our lives?" Question a lot of people have grappled with, including novelists, not just memoirists.
Yes, I don't know what to. I'm still taking things out and putting them in, and taking them out and putting them in. My way of dealing with this is wherever intimate relations are dealt with, I begin by saying I am completely to blame. Anything that went wrong in this friendship or this marriage, it's my fault. Anything that this person says about me, if it's an ex-wife who says I'm a horrible man, a vile husband, a lousy lover, and a terrible friend, it's all true. So I kind of, I shovel onto myself all the obloquy that's going. That's my way of doing it. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult because, and one of the things that you do is you distort. One of the most popular memoirs of modern times was by the writer Clive James, and he called it Unreliable Memoirs. And that's, I wish he hadn't taken that title, because I feel that my memoirs are unreliable. Philip Roth wrote a memoir and he called it The Facts. And the implied joke were anything less like a fact than what I'm about to tell you now, you can't imagine. Because in truth, there isn't a fact. There is no such thing in a life as a fact, apart from dates of being born, dates of dying. The rest is a matter of interpretation. But the questioner is right, and it's a good question. It's writing a memoir is fraught with those dangers. You don't want to hurt anybody unless you do.
Questions are pouring in. Somebody from your own island. Well, it's a local question, but why not? Daniel asked, you wanted people to vote against the Scottish referendum. Has that stand changed since the advent of Brexit?
Yes. I think the Scottish people would be fools to have anything to do with the British any longer. I think get the hell out. I think the British now, I will suffer for this, but the British now should be allowed to just go sink. I think what we've done is so reprehensible. I think our tone and attitude towards the rest of the world is so disgusting. I think we will pay a heavy price for it, and I think the Scots would be mad to have anything to do with it. Leave, my Scottish brethren, leave. And if I can get away, I will come and join you.
Where are you going to live in that case? What part of the...
Edinburgh.
Somewhere close to Alexander McCall Smith?
Yeah, I don't mind that.
Okay, let's see if there's any more questions, but we're also coming very close to the end of our session, which has proved to be a very entertaining...
Sure.
Okay, last question from Vatsal. More and more people are being incarcerated for their humor. Is humor at risk? We covered some of this ground, but if you speak about it some more.
Yes, humor is at risk. It's not at risk from incarceration in Britain at the moment, not from incarceration, but it is at risk from homogeneity.
Yes.
The feeling that all humor should be the same and that we should all agree about things, and the fact that people are trying to censor humor. People are saying you shouldn't make jokes about this and you shouldn't make jokes about that, and you can't do that. Yes, I think it's very frightening. Freedom of speech, of which the most perfect example of freedom of speech is the joke. I don't mean, there was an Irishman, though it might be that. I mean the play of comedy that dissolves all certainty. Certainty is our great enemy. The belief that some things are certainly true and some things aren't. Comedy won't have that. And in a world in which people believe that, comedy has never been important, but it's never been in more danger either.
And with that, a message. Session time is over. Howard, we have just sped through too fast through 45 minutes, and now we're going to have to wait for years again before we meet.
What a shame.
Since we're not allowed to visit each other's countries.
Well, you're welcome to visit. I'll smuggle you in.
Pardon?
Say you're my brother, and then we can be in a family called the family bubble. Come and join my family bubble.
Well, let's see how that goes across at immigration, but do send me your address just in case.
I will, and it's lovely to see you and to talk.
All right. Pleasure to see you, sir, again. Be well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chandrahas Choudhury. Thank you so much, Howard Jacobson. Maybe your title should be The Timid and the Unconventional. The Timid and the Conventional. Exactly what you said, the title, if you go. Or I Am Not Eccentric. I mean, either of the two.
That's not bad. Thank you very much. A pound is in an envelope.
I will come and claim it once the world opens up again, in whatever period that is.
It won't be worth very much by then.
But seriously, thank you both so much. And I think, laughter and comedy is so very important, as we know. But unfortunately, at least in India and many parts of the world,
yes.
It's at great risk, and all of us tend to take ourselves way too seriously, and we're just always so concerned about being angry with somebody, and like you said, arguing with somebody else out there rather than arguing with yourself. And that was just such a brilliant session. Thank you so much, Howard Jacobson.
Thank you
Thank
for
you so much, Chandrahas Choudhury, and we look forward to, why should it take so long? I mean, you guys are not going anywhere. You're all locked down. So
I'm certainly not going anywhere. You know where I am.
we will find another occasion. However, stay safe in Soho. I mean, it is death alley in many ways, with everybody wanting to come down there and drink every time you open up London for whatever reason.
Death Alley is a bit frightening. It never occurred to me it was Death Alley, but I'm definitely staying in tonight. I told my wife, it's Death Alley. Staying in tonight.
Thank you all for watching, and being a wonderful audience. And we do look forward to seeing you tomorrow again for 2 wonderful sessions. And of course, we thank our official radio partners, Red FM Bajate Raho. Please do remember to log in on Saturday, the 18th of July, for another set of great sessions, Defining Luxury, Tarun Telyani and Himanshu Vardhan in conversation with Nonita Kalra. Tarun Telyani speaks of his signature fusion of traditional aesthetics and contemporary design. A conversation with Himanshu Vardhan and Nonita Kalra on the shifting definitions of luxury and the impetus to make quality and excellence accessible through digital outreach. This session is presented in partnership with Etsy and is at 7 p.m. IST, 2:30 p.m. British Summer Time, and 9:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And our second session tomorrow, Saturday, the 18th of July, is Writing from the Brink. Brian Keenan in conversation with Salil Tripathi. Brian Keenan became headline news when he was kidnapped by a Shiite militiaman in 1985 and held hostage in Beirut for 4.5 years. The intensity and horror of that traumatic encounter is recounted in An Evil Cradling. His next book, I'll Tell Me Ma, is a memoir. Here you go, Howard, a memoir about growing up in Belfast. In conversation with writer, journalist, and human rights activist Salil Tripathi, he speaks of the trauma of incarceration and the will to survive. This will be at 8:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time, 4 p.m. British Summer Time, and 11 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. See you tomorrow. Stay safe.